Hello, welcome everyone. Happy fall. I'm happy to see all of you joining us now. I'm so glad you made the time to join us today. This is a very popular topic, so we can't wait to dive in. We are Biocide and Botanicals. So if we haven't met, my name is Maria Ackerman, and I'm president of Biocide and Botanicals. On behalf of our company, I'm so pleased to welcome you today. This has been a year of innovation for us, and I can't even believe it. We're closing in on the end of 2023. I've been looking back over the year with our team, and I have to say 2023 has been a banner year. In addition to our successful online 2-day gut summit, which many of you may have attended, this has been our year of product development. And of course, we're always monitoring the latest science, industry innovations, farming, manufacturing advancements, new technology. And that led us to update several products and to launch 2 new ones. So we have updated ProFlora 4R with the latest research-backed strains of spore probiotics. We increased the percentage of organic botanicals in our Biocide and Botanical blend. So that is now certified organic. We launched GI Intercalm, a delicious gut powder that offers soothing GI and nervous system support. And we're on the cusp of another exciting product launch, Dental Flora, probiotics for your mouth. So that's right, probiotics for your mouth. Last year, we updated our toothpaste and oral rinse and launched them together as the Dental Site and Oral Care System. So even then, as we reviewed new research on the microbiome, which of course has been our focus for more than 30 years, we saw what was coming next, probiotics for the mouth. So we worked with our good friend, Dr. Ariana Ibrahimian, a functional integrative dentist and member of our scientific advisory board to develop Dental Flora. I have to share, just yesterday, I was on hand as our first batch of Dental Flora was bottled. It's very exciting. We hope to be shipping by the end of the month. And in fact, I just got confirmation we will be ready to ship for the Black Friday promotion. That's of course the day after Thanksgiving. So what you'll get when you order a bottle is a month's supply, 30 dissolvable probiotic tablets that promote healthy teeth and gums by seeding the oral cavity with beneficial bacteria. So this is like your final step, right? Your finishing step at night. The tablets contain a proprietary blend of 4 targeted science-backed probiotics, including evidence-based Bliss M18 at research levels. We sweeten Dental Flora with xylitol, which has its own benefits. It inhibits plaque formation and may help reduce the risk of cavities. And it's naturally flavored with organic spearmint leaf extract. So Dental Flora is one of those products that's so simple, easy to use. The benefits are profound. Think of it as one more reason to smile. And of course, you'll be hearing more. We'll be talking more about this product in the weeks and months to come. So that's us. And now I'd like to introduce our special guest today. We're so happy to have Brian Karr here for Hidden Mold, Exposing and Remediating the Root Cause of Mold Illness. Welcome, Brian. Thanks for being with us today. Brian is in the family business, a second-generation indoor environmental consultant. He helped found the mold inspection company called We Inspect. And while the company is based in California, they do business all over the world and have helped thousands of people identify and deal with indoor pathogens. Healthcare providers turn to Brian as well. He has become a resource on mold and biotoxins for medical practitioners across the country. He's here to help us understand how to find and resolve mold exposure for lasting health. So let's also welcome Dr. Jocelyn Strand, Biocide and Botanicals Director of Clinical Education and Research. Hi, Dr. Strand. Great to see you here together as always.
Hi, Maria. Thank you.
We're navigating some technical difficulties today, so thank you everyone for sticking with us.
Now we can see your face again, which is awesome.
Okay, well, as long as we get the information in, I think everyone will be happy. Well, let me introduce Dr. Strand to everyone. If you haven't heard her speak before, she is a true wealth of information. Before Dr. Strand joined our team, though, she worked as a naturopathic doctor in a variety of clinical settings, from hospitals to her own private practice in Minnesota. She's an expert on the microbiome and avidly follows and participates in microbiome-related research. So I hope you've had the good fortune to hear her speak at an industry conference or event. We have a very big one coming up. I hope you're going to join us for A4M World Congress in Las Vegas. Her passion and curiosity make her an engaging speaker, and it's always a pleasure to learn from her. She leads our clinical team and loves helping to equip fellow practitioners to use our products effectively. So great to have you with us today, Dr. Strand.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited about A4M. I'm presenting a case, some research that's really exciting on metabolic syndrome and the microbiome. So super pumped about that.
Exciting. Okay, great. I can't wait. So, okay, that's enough from me. Let's jump into our main event. Brian Karr, I'll turn it over to you now.
Hey, I'm not muted now, so hopefully everybody can hear me. The technical difficulty was me not knowing to push the mute button. That's what the technical difficulty for me was.
Zoom 101.
I know, exactly. Well, listen, I'm
we all do
super
it.
excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me. And Dr. Strand, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming here, and thanks to Maria for opening the conversation up. So Brian and I talked, I don't know, was that last spring maybe that I interviewed on your podcast?
Yeah,
and
it was a while ago.
It was yeah, it was a little while ago, but Brian has a podcast and it's really great information. And it was a really great conversation. And I felt with your knowledge, I wanted to bring that to our practitioner community and to the consumers as well. And so I'm really excited that you said yes to joining us today. And I mean, this is an area that affects so many of us. And whether we've gotten sick from mold or whether we want to support patients who've had mold exposure, I think it's a very confusing area to really understand how best to support. And I want to do one more plug, which is that, one of the things that really excited me about working with you or talking to you was that you have this particular expertise in supporting healthcare providers who are working with patients that have had mold exposure, and how to walk a very sensitive and sick person through the mold and remediation process, which I think is really, kind of a standout skill to have in the industry. So I'm super pumped that you're here, and we have so much to talk about. So I'm going to hop right in with the first question, which is just to talk in general about mold as an environmental challenge and where we're at with it in general.
Yeah, it's there's almost like two sides of it. Sometimes people think it's not as big of a thing because they don't see it everywhere. It's not all over your walls. It's not that big a deal. If you can't see it, it can't hurt you. I feel like this room knows better than that, right? So we have to get like super into that. Just to give some context, the EPA put out that 50% of buildings are water damaged. Now the EPA gets a lot of mold stuff wrong. They're saying that 50% of them are water damaged. That is so underestimating the true impact of what it means. And to really understand that, we have to think of like what water damage means and kind of like how they think of it, but what it truly means, right? Like for the EPA to know that something's water damage, that means it has to be a big enough issue where it got handled by a big company that came in and it was somehow reported in some way and it was tracked. But what they're not tracking is grandma who used to live in your house 30 years ago who overflooded the dishwasher. That's not being tracked, right? Mm-hmm. My 4-year-old splashing water out of the tub and getting on the wall next to the shower and causing what is a water damage problem. That is a water damage problem, right? A leak under my sink that happened 2 months ago and I caught it 2 months later and yeah, it was dripping, but I just dried it out or whatever, right? This is what true water damage actually looks like. It's a combination. Yeah, my basement flooded. I get it. That's a big thing. But these other little things, when you start adding up those things that happen in a house over time, it becomes a lot of little water damage specific things that have happened. And each one of those areas now become a potential area for source growth for a mold problem. And if you've had 7 of those things happen in your house, they add up, they add up, they add up. Now they push in. So I would say, honestly, for all the homes I've been in, it's 90% of homes that have a water damage problem, and that's anecdotal, so take it for what it's worth. But like 9 out of 10 houses I walk into, I will find some version of water damage. How much, how little, depends, right? But the thing that we need to understand is that it's more the norm for a home to have a leak, a drip, a water intrusion than the exception. And I think the myth that's floating around generally out there is that it's the opposite. It's the exception for there to be water damage in a house, and it's the norm for our houses to be perfect and not like that. And so that's one of the big challenges.
Well, it's really great information. And I think I just heard Joe Krista speak at the A4M Pediatric Summit, and she had that image of Homer Simpson like backing into the bushes and them closing around him, which I don't know if you've seen that GIF or not, but it's like none of us really want, like, we only maybe want to know if it's going to be an easy fix, or if it's going to be, straightforward, or, if we're really committed to our health or experiencing health issues. So I just think it's probably, I would imagine you would be the expert on this, like a touchy issue, right? To point out to people where they have mold growth or where they may have toxic mold growing.
It is. And one of the things, whenever I speak with doctors and medical professionals, right? Like part of your guys' job, for whatever it is, unfortunately or fortunately, is you kind of become a guide for your patients in a way, because they come to you. You're the one that opens the door to, hey, there's this mold exposure thing happening, and they don't know. So you kind of almost turn into their shepherd in a way. And so a lot of times when we have these conversations, I want to kind of arm you guys with tools and responses and analogies and metaphors and things that you can use, right, to be able to kind of get the information back to them. And the thing about not knowing, right, it's like we hide from it until we need to hide from it. If we can get ahead of it and we're more open to it. And I think one of the reasons that people feel that way is it almost feels like we're attacking an individual who lives in a house for them having a dirty house. Like they view, if you talk to somebody who owns their house, you're like, yeah, I think we have these mold problems in your house. I found 7 areas of water damage or whatever. I know I'm saying 7 all the time, but sure. We found this many things in your house. A lot of times they take that as like a personal attack. Like, I'm not good enough at maintaining my house and I don't keep a clean house, but and that's not what it is. And I think, if just from the very beginning of shaping this journey with them, it's like, it is normal for these things to happen.
Sure.
And it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It just means we need to be aware of it. And we can start reframing how people view this from the very beginning. And then the path off of that becomes a lot easier.
I love that. And so since we are a company that focuses on the human body and healthcare, could we just pause or briefly sort of make a stop on the mold conversation to talk about what it might look like when a person has a mold exposure, if they're sensitive to mold, if they're not sensitive to mold, how it might look from a health perspective?
Yeah, and I feel like I'm going to be speaking to the choir here, so I'll try to be quick on this. But like from what we see, it's a couple things. It's a chronic situation that has not been able to get figured out, right? We've tried all the things. There's been a past. Sometimes people go 2, 3, 4, 5 longer years, even before they get the pinpoint that there's an environmental issue. A lot of times a mold trigger that's kind of root behind this. So the first thing is, if you're somebody or you're working with somebody and you've kind of tried what you think should be working based off of your protocols and what works, and it's not working, that's like a big red flag. Like, hey, we might not have thought about this before, but we should really start thinking about this, because so many times that's the piece that once we address it, all of a sudden everything that you were working on your side of things starts working again, right? Like you kind of take the barrier out. So just from a big perspective, just something to kind of think of from what it looks like in terms of like individuals and symptoms and this and that. I mean, it's multi-system, it's multi-symptom, right? And it can happen in so many different ways. I mean, we see neurological, we see skin. You guys were talking gut-skin connection. So skin, gut gets all out of whack as well. Nervous system, hormones, reproductive, like all of it, right? Yeah. So it looks like an issue that isn't very easily pinpointed, that doesn't maybe necessarily make a lot of sense when you're applying kind of your basic knowledge on how to address certain things. I think that's overarching what it looks like. And that's me saying it, not being a doctor. So please take it for what it's worth. But that's what I pick up from clients when they're coming in and they're kind of telling me their story and, their symptoms and sort of how they got to us.
No, but you talk to all the doctors on your podcast. So, yeah. But I think it's interesting because you asked me a similar question, on the podcast when you interviewed me, and now I'm on the receiving end of almost identical answer, and I think it's just really interesting because it is vague. I mean, and that's the issue, right? Is that it's a chronic inflammation. it can look like many things. For me, I think of the one that always tips the scale for me personally is I have like candida or yeasty fungally things rise when I get a mold exposure. You know, they're similar. I mean, they're all related. So I think of those things, but I think what you're saying, like that chronic, I would think about like immune suppression in general, right? So people who are getting every cold and flu that comes through and they can't seem to get on top of it. And but other than that, I think I feel exactly the same way. I don't even have anything else to add.
Yeah.
So let's get back to your particular area of expertise, which is to talk about mold myths. And you've already sort of alluded to some of these as well, but you have three. One of the things you shared with us is 3 mold myths, if you want to go into those.
Yeah, so I kind of threw a 4th one in there at the beginning, is that most houses don't have water damage. Well, the truth is most houses do have water damage. It's just a matter of being able to know how to look for them. I think the big things are, one, this idea that if you have a problem that is behind a wall or under a cabinet, and there's some sort of visual barrier here, that it can't impact us, right? And, you know, when you think about it, I say this a lot, like a lot of these myths, they're all rooted in what seems to make sense, right? So what our challenge is to challenge the foundational kind of support of that myth. And if we could say, oh, well, the foundation doesn't make sense, then all of the decisions and the thought process that come off of that initial limiting belief from that foundation now changes. Now it goes over here instead of going over here, right? There's this point in time where if we change that, we can now change how we're discussing and thinking and receiving information and all of that stuff, right? So the first thing about if it's behind a wall, it can't get out to me, which every local inspector that's going to come into all your patients' houses are going to tell them this. They're going to be like, oh, it's behind the wall. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Like, this is like such a common thing that happens. And, you know, the first thing I would say is most homes, and I think everybody kind of gets the feel for this. You don't walk into a house and there's mold all over all the walls, right? That's not how it works. That's how you sell cleaning products when you're Tilex and you're trying to sell your mold cleaning product, but that is not the reality of what happens. So if we know that when you walk into a house, you're not seeing it everywhere, then why is everybody sick from it? Why does everybody have mycotoxins in their system? And why do they have all their elevated inflammation markers? And why are we finding in their sinuses and we're finding, you know, overgrowth and all the stuff that you're talking about if it can't get out from back here? How is it possible? So that's the first thing. Like, the proof is in the fact that people are getting more and more sick from it. And it's not like it's sitting on the surfaces everywhere, right? Like, that's the first piece. And then we say, okay, how does it work? So I use this analogy a lot, guys. Keep this metaphor. I call it the ghost metaphor. Keep it, write it down, put a note on it. It works very well. If anyone has ever, actually, if there's a way for hand raises and stuff to happen in here, just so I know if people are hitting when I'm landing, that would be cool too. So I'm gonna ask if anybody has ever had this happen, just like do a hand raise, just so I know that I'm hitting the mark here. Already hand raising. Okay, so
they can put it in the chat. That might be a place where they can put it.
Yeah, so if anyone has ever opened a door or a window in their house and they heard a door on the other side of the house slam shut, hand raises, anybody who's ever heard that, right? Here they literally, like, hundreds of these are coming in right now. Literally everyone has experienced this in some way. So it's a really easy metaphor to use for your patients because everyone has felt this in some way. What is happening is that you are getting a change in air pressure in your house. So invisible air that we can't see is moving so hard because you changed the pressure of the house that it's slamming a door shut somewhere else. Your house is not haunted. You don't have ghosts in your house that are doing this, okay? A lot of times we hear that, we're like, oh, that weird thing happened, and we're not putting it together. If you can illustrate to your patients and the people that you're working with, when you do that, what is happening is that air is getting pushed so hard in your house that is slamming a door shut 30, 40 feet down the hallway. Then we can understand that every time you open a door, you open a window, you turn on your exhaust fan in your bathroom, you turn on your dryer for your clothing dryer, you turn on your vent hood for your kitchen, all of these things are pulling air the exact same way. And it pulls all through the walls and all through the little cracks and crevices in these interstitial spaces in the house. And all of that stuff gets out. It all gets out, but it's small and you can't see it, right? And there are plenty of research papers that support all of this. Just so you guys know, I'm not just making all this stuff up. Like, I've looked all this stuff up, but I also know it from being in the field and just kind of seeing how it works. So That is the first myth. So somebody's like, it's behind the wall, it can't impact me. Why would anyone be sick if that's true? And do you have a ghost in your house? Like, those are the two things. You keep those two things in your back pocket and you can start talking to people through this. The next one that I had set up is more about the method of how we test a house. So the question is like, it's like, hey, Brian, like, we all breathe air. So why can't I take an air test in a house and tell me what's going on in the house, right? So just for those of you that don't know, if you haven't really been through this process or don't have patients who have been through this process, your local inspectors, typically what they do is they call it air quality testing. By the way, if anyone ever says they're doing air quality testing in your house and your goal is to have a mold inspection done, just don't even hire them. Don't give them your money. Don't let them in their house. They don't know what they're doing. You can tell just by the verbiage that they use that they don't know what they're doing, right? And so what they're doing is they're putting an air sample pump in the middle of a room, and they're taking an air sample for 5 minutes. They're testing the air, because let's go back. Logically, it makes sense. I breathe the air. Let me test the air. Let me see what's going on. Lines up. Cool. Now all of our decisions are made off of actually something that is not true, right? As we move forward, right? And that, by the way, is why people get a false sense of security that there's no problem in their house. And then they come back to you. I would love to see hands on this. How many people have come back to you and said, I had my house checked. There's no mold there. You're wrong, right? Bam, there they go. Because this happens all the time, right? So what we need to understand is why that is actually not true. So when you put an air pump in the middle of the room, basically what you're doing is you're pulling air in for about 5 minutes, right? That's what you do. That's how it pulls. It's pulling whatever is around that can pull in. Couple things with this. One, if I sent my 4-year-old in the room and told her to play for a little while and she's jumping around on stuff and going nuts like a 4-year-old does, there's going to be way more particle that's airborne, which means there's going to be more stuff that could potentially get pulled into that air sample. As opposed to if I just woke up in the morning and like very gently set this pump over here and just walked out of the room and I ran it at that period of time, it's going to be a completely different read. It is so variable that you can't really trust it just from the variability of where and how it's being collected. Now, the second thing is that air samples get less and less and less effective the further away from the source that you get of the problem. So I publicly, and a lot of times I bash air testing because most people use it in the wrong way. And then the question is like, well, but you say that you use air testing for things. We do. We call it source air testing. Meaning if I think there's a problem in this wall, you know what I'm doing? I'm putting a little hole in this wall and I'm taking an air sample right where I think the problem is, as opposed to walking 4 feet over here and testing it over here and like, yeah, we'll see if we pick it up or not. And so for a year, because I knew that this was true, but most people do this. So for a year, every house that we went into, one spot in each house where I thought there was a problem, say, cool, I'm going to source test this the way you're supposed to. And then I'm going to put an air sampling pump right over here the way that all the other guys do it. 78% of the time, this said there was no problem when there was a problem right here, less than 3 feet away. This is the problem with doing air samples in the middle of rooms as the method for telling us if there's a mold problem, right? Now, there are better ways to understand general mold issues in a space. It's through actually dust analysis, which we'll get into later. But just know if your patients are coming in and like, yeah, we had air tests done in different rooms. I'm telling you now from a year, 78% of the time that thing is wrong when there's a problem, no more than 3 feet away. So the real question is, well, like, how long did they spend in your house? Did they open every single cabinet? They go in every room? Were they in your house for 4 to 8 hours? Or were they in your house for 20 to 30 minutes to collect a couple samples? Because if you're not testing in the right place, then you can't get the right information, right? And like, the same for you guys, like you're running clinical tests, whatever you're doing. The air test in the middle of the room is not the right test for the situation. So if you're trying to run, let's say, a mycotoxin test, which is pulled through urine, and instead you're doing a blood sample to tell me if I have mycotoxin in my urine, of course it's going to be wrong. That's like what the equivalent is of doing an air test in the middle of the room to tell you if there's a problem. So that's one of the big
sort of like common sense comes into play.
It does, but only when you explain it. Otherwise, the core belief, common sense, is I breathe air, I'm going to collect an air sample, right? So it's not like people are like thinking wrong. They just haven't been educated to move the thought to where it needs to come from, right? And so that's all that it is just a little reframe and understanding of what it is. Now, the last one of the myths is about this idea that mold needs water to grow, right? So you'll see people come in and they got their moisture meters and they got their infrared cameras, and this is how they go through a house. I'm not saying that we don't use those things, right? But what we have found and what we know to be true is while mold needs water to grow, it does not need water to stay, right? Your mold colony is not like a little family that lives in a little village that has a river that's running by the village. And when the river runs out, they pack their family and put their teepees on their back and they go figure out where they're going to go find another river to live. That's not what they do. That's not how it works. They're more like a flower or a weed or something like that. I watered it, it grew, the water goes away. What happens to a flower? How many of you have had like someone you dated or your spouse or somebody like get you flowers and you want to save them, right? And so like you put them upside down on the wall as they dry out, you know, they dry out because you're not watering them. And then what happens if you touch that flower afterwards? The whole thing crumbles up and disintegrates in your hand. All the water's gone, the lifelessness, it's gone. But your mold colonies do the same thing. It was growing, it was sturdy, there was water, we stopped the leak, we fixed the problem. We think we stopped the mold and got rid of the mold because we stopped the water, but did we? No. What the mold did is it dried out and it stayed there. And now as the ghost air comes flying through the house, like we talked about earlier, it hits these things that have dried out and breaks them into teeny tiny little pieces and sends them all throughout the house through the air path that we just talked about. And that's how our exposure happens. So I would say 85 to 90% of the problems that we find in homes are in areas that are not currently wet, that had a sign of water damage, bubbling paint, you know, whatever it might be, some cracking, whatever. And it was dry right now. And we tested it at the source where mold would have grown if there was a problem. And that's where we find everything. So those are the big three myths, I think, to get into.
Okay. It's starting to feel like we need some tools at this point. So let's talk about how local mold inspectors are making people more sick.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of threw it out a little bit, but it's this false sense of security that someone gets when they get a piece of information from a source that they trust that's wrong information. Like imagine if your patient came to you and you ran the blood test to tell you something that can only be found in urine. And then you said, it's not in your blood, you're good. That patient trusts you. You must know what you're doing. Now they go off on their way and they're like, well, I don't have this problem because it wasn't in my test, when you literally did the wrong test to like tell them what's going on. And so that's what these local inspectors are doing. They're coming in, they're doing air testing in a way that doesn't make sense. They're telling you 78% of the time when there is a problem that there isn't one. And then you go back home and exactly what I asked earlier happens, where they come up to you and they say, I don't have a mold problem in my house. Sorry, what's next? Treat me some other way.
Yeah.
When the reality is that you're actually right and they're wrong, right? And now you've got this thing you have to work. And that's how they make people more sick, because it adds time. When you add time to exposure, the symptoms, they progress, they get worse and they get worse. So that's really how it's happening.
And it adds another obstacle to healing, which is incorrect information, keeping us from finding the underlying cause, which is, you know, very challenging as a healthcare provider.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share this. I don't know if this is the right spot to do this. Maybe I'm going to stop share, actually, is what I'm going to do, and ask you about the two goals of a proper mold inspection.
Yeah, we tease it. Somebody asked about ERMI. Don't worry, guys, I'm getting into ERMI. There are two goals in every single mold inspection. There has to be. And if you're not addressing both of the goals, you're not actually handling the process. And it's very similar to what all of you do. Why is something happening? And how is it sort of like spreading around and impacting other areas, right? So for a house, where are the sources of mold at? We can't fix the problem if we don't know where it's coming from. Even if you did an air sample in the middle of the room and it said there was a problem, the 22% of the time that it actually is right, what do you do after that? Like, what would the answer be? Your only answer would be, I guess, gut the entire room because I don't know where it's coming from, right? Mm-hmm. So every test that you run has to be tied to a decision that gets made off of it. And so for us, it's we go through a house, we have to figure out where we think the sources are. Meaning, if I think there's something in this wall, I got to test this wall to know if there's a problem here, which would then facilitate a remediation recommendation on the back end, right? So the first piece is really thorough inspection. Where are all the sources at? How do we address these, right? And validating that stuff. Then the second piece is to understand how those sources, because again, our faces aren't back here, right? We talked about how it comes out, right? But it's not like our face is behind the wall. So the second thing then is what is coming out into the space, the particle, the toxins, all the stuff that's kind of breaking off of that. And what are we being exposed to? That is our exposure path, actually. So we're not breathing behind the wall. What we're actually breathing is particles that get resuspended into our breathing zone as we move around our house. So I sit in my chair, I bump my desk, I walk over here, I do this, and we're constantly creating something that's called the personal cloud. It's called the personal cloud effect, is how this works. The visual is, if you ever watched Charlie Brown, you saw the really dirty kid, Pigpen, walking around with dirt around him all the time. That happens to every single one of us, except instead of smelly, gross dirt, it is invisible particle that we're popping up around us as we move all the time. Every step that you take, this is happening. That's how we're being exposed. So there's a two-path sort of thing to this. There's source that's creating our exposure, comes out, settles down. I sit on my chair, pops up, exposed, right? So in order to really understand how to properly address a house, we need to know where is it coming from so we can remove the factory, the source of where it's coming from, so it doesn't continue to come out. And then what has gotten into our exposure path, meaning is it just mold? Is it mycotoxins? Is it endotoxins? Is it bacterial components that are there? And has that moved into our heating and air conditioning system, which also recirculates it around? How do we address the sort of exposure zone, which is a combination of your settlement, just kind of dust settlement, and your heating ventilation systems? So you have to address source and you have to address exposure zones. And if you do both of those, it works. And the big reason that remediation doesn't work is because either you didn't find all the sources or you didn't clean up the secondary part, which is your exposure stuff. If you removed every wall in your house and got rid of everything, but you didn't actually do a thorough cleaning in the house or address your HVAC system, your patients are going to walk back in and feel the exact same way, even though they removed every source, because it's still circulating. So you got to get rid of the circulation, you got to get rid of the source. So those are kind of the two big things on inspections.
Okay. I'm making some notes. If you see me looking down, that's why. Okay, so the secret to finding hidden mold
is to not look for it. That's the big secret. The secret is not to look for the mold on the walls, because if that's what you're looking for, you're not going to find any of it. The secret is to look for these signs of water damage that I was sort of alluding to with most houses have water damage. What does that look like? Bubbling paint, a warped floor a little bit, a baseboard that's pulling off of a wall a little teeny tiny stain over here, something that's rusted. Rust only happens if moisture is there, right? Like there are these things, there's only 5 of them. There's only those 5 things that you look for. It's bubbling, it's cracking and peeling, it's bowing and separating and buckling, it's water staining, and it's like chemical reactions like rust or corrosion or something like that. That's it. That's how water damage manifests, those 5 things. So the secret is to be able to walk into a room, know how to see these things, and feel like you're walking. I feel like I'm in the Matrix when I walk into a room now. Like it's just like I'm like looking around and I'm looking for these specific things that most people overlook because they're not thinking about it, right? But once I learned how to look for it, and once I taught my team how to look for it, and once our internal training and certification program hammered it in, it's like, bam, now we know what to look for. So the 5 things, so I'm gonna ask to repeat it. So just say it one more time. I don't know if I had a slide on it or not. If I did, we could throw it up.
I'll look while you repeat it.
Yeah. Bubbling paint is a big one. Separating or buckling a building material. So think of a baseboard coming off a wall or buckled floor. So something that's actually like kind of moving or warping or something like that. Cracking or peeling. Okay, that's a big one. So if you look at, you can see in like cabinetry, it happens a lot. Paint's cracking, wood's cracking, it's peeling. It looks like it's chipping, something like that. Efflorescence or corrosion. So efflorescence means like that white powdery stuff that if you ever look in your crawl space or in your basement, you see this white powdery stuff on like the block wall. That means water has come through, and it's essentially a mineral deposit. That's essentially what this is, right? So like a mineral deposit or corrosion or rust or something like that. And then the last one is just like actual water staining. See water staining, then clearly that's it. That's it. So if we know that those are the 5 things, then we can now start working through and doing that.
That's great. I mean, really, really useful. I think if we left with nothing else but that today, it would be really helpful information. Okay, so why are there so many mold remediations that are failed or that fail?
Yeah, I feel like I keep going ahead. I kind of hit, so there's really 2 reasons. We didn't find all the sources. So they could be the best remediation company in the world. They could remediate the source exactly how they're supposed to. They could clean the house exactly like they're supposed to. But if we only found 2 sources and there's 12, then you still have 10 other things that are still continuously pushing in the house, and it redoes. So the first thing is that you didn't find all the sources. The second thing is their process. What they aren't good at remediating. So either they didn't know what to remediate, meaning they didn't have the full roadmap on what to do and how to and where it is, or they just kind of suck at it and they shortcut it and they don't do what you're supposed to do at, right? They don't handle the source properly and clean the whole house, right? So the process is wrong. So you either aren't finding everything you need to address, or the process is just wrong. And so I kind of mentioned earlier, it's a two-phase process. It's you remediate source, removal of walls, you know, things that are impacted, cleaning of the wood framing that's back there. There should be no construction debris left at the end of this, no dust, no anything. I should be able to white glove all of this stuff afterwards, and nothing should be there, because spores and particles and fragments live in the dust and the buildup that's back there. So even though you might not see, let's say, black on a piece of wood anymore, let's say they sanded and wire brushed it down and all of it's just kind of sitting down there on the bottom because they didn't clean it, it's going to come back in as the ghost air starts pushing everything back in, right? So we have to remediate source, and then it's cleaning of the house. And there's various ways to do that depending on what's going on in the house, but you have to make sure you're cleaning up that exposure path. So those are really the big reasons that remediations don't work. And it's why people think they don't work. And it's why they feel like they have to go live in the woods afterwards. It's because they just didn't follow process right.
So I want to give us time to go into solutions and sort of how you and your company manage a mold issue in a home. I want to first touch quickly on endotoxin as well. So lipopolysaccharides, and if you want to talk a little bit about what it is, and because at one point you talked to me about your own exposures going into all of these houses and how endotoxin was included as part of that for you, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
I'd love for you to share that with the audience here.
Yeah, well, you know, we learn from you guys all the time. I mean, frankly, the reason that we kind of are what we are is because all of you are sharing information on what you're learning and what's impacting your patients. And we're able to take that and say, okay, how do we connect the dots here on the environment side so we can help tell the whole picture, right? And I would say like maybe 5 years ago or so is really when we started hearing from the medical community about endotoxins and bacteria specifically, and the importance of being able to see that in terms of an exposure, because, you know, and I started learning, it's like, hey, it's not like our body's like, oh, mold is the only thing. It's like our body sees these foreign things from water damaged spaces that aren't supposed to be there, which is why, you know, the terminology sort of changed from mold illness to environmentally acquired illness, specifically triggered from water damaged places, because we all started to learn it wasn't just a mold thing, right? There's biotoxins, there's bacteria, there, you know, there's other stuff that goes on. And so kind of challenged us like, hey, can we figure out like what the load of the bacteria stuff looks like as well? Because that might be influencing how we want to look at stuff, or even just to understand what their initial exposure load looks like in the first place, so we know where we're starting from. And so we started testing for bacteria, endotoxins, you know, on the home side of stuff too. And what we started seeing is that the frequency that we were picking up either bacterial organisms or the endotoxin was actually more frequent than when we were picking up mycotoxins in a house.
Interesting.
So, and then you think about it, we keep saying like reframe your original thought process. Bacteria grows first. Bacteria grows in hours. Mold grows in days to weeks. So if you have a mold problem, there's probably a likelihood that you have some version of a bacteria problem going on as well. You just need enough water for it to happen, right? And so we started seeing that, understanding like, oh, we might need to like layer in our more aggressive home cleaning approach, because now we're seeing this whole other side of stuff that's floating around in the house that we weren't looking at before. And so that's kind of the play. But then you know, you think about it, we breathe this stuff in, it gets into our postnasal drip, it gets into our sinuses, direct line to the gut. You know, the breathing pathway, it's into your lungs, but you also have a direct line into your gut because you get the postnasal drip from everything that gets in your sinuses and stay there. So it's kind of like a double whammy on how environment is getting into your body.
And mold is very toxic, of course, and pro-inflammatory, but even lipopolysaccharides, that LPS or endotoxin that comes from gram-negative bacteria that you're testing is the single most potent immune stimulant that we know of. So it is an important piece. And I think it's just amazing that you're including that in your testing as well. And because we're right there, we talk a little bit. So we have, you know, your slides on ERMI. I'm going to pull up those slides and let you sort of spend some time, if that's okay, talking about what the different testing options are and what you recommend.
So we need to understand the goal of what we're doing in testing and what's going on. And I think that's like really the big piece. Now, a lot of times when we talk to doctors, practitioners, one of the bigger challenges is even getting their patient to believe them that there's possibly a mold issue in the house. So there's like this sort of proof validation thing that needs to happen in order to help them continue to progress and move and make, you know, the changes and the actions that, you know, you guys know you need for your protocols to work, right? And so that's really where ERMI came in. So can I see like hands? How many people know what ERMI is? Just have you heard of it? Have you seen it? Have you used it? Like whatever. Okay, a few. Okay, so there they all come. All right, that makes more sense. All right, so let me talk through ERMI real quick. So it stands for Environmental Relative Moldiness Index. A lot of us think of ERMI as an actual test because that's how it's marketed. That's how it's talked about. We're going to do an ERMI test. ERMI is not actually a test. ERMI specifically is an index. It is an interpretation of a test. And I think if we learn that, it's going to reshape how we think about this whole thing. There are two components to, I'm going to call it an ERMI test now, just because that's what everybody calls it. But I really want to be clear on the front that ERMI is not actually a test. It's an interpretation of data. But because I have no other way to say it, I'm just going to keep calling it that. And that's at the core of the problem of this whole thing. There are two things that happen. So the EPA did this study years ago. They came out of two things. The first thing they came out with was MSQ PCR, which is mold-specific PCR, DNA formatting down to the species level. This truly is the gold standard of understanding what is happening, full load of exposure. It accounts for fragments and spores. It's all of it. That information is incredible, and that's why people run ERMI a lot, right? Because we're really able to get an understanding of the overall load of what's going on. Now, for context, an ERMI sample is literally a dust collection sample in the house. So I said before that we breathe everything that gets popped up into our house or into our breathing pathway. That's our exposure path. Dust collects all of it. Think of it like a spider web at the bottom of the floor that grabs everything that's happening in your house, right? As we move around, it pops up. So instead of back earlier when I was talking about air tests and how they don't work to tell us if we have a mold problem, what's the answer? Dust testing. Dust testing is what we need to be doing, not air testing. You can do air tests at source. It's great at that. That's what it's for. If I'm trying to just understand if I have a mold problem in my house, not specifically where it's coming from, you have to get to the dust. The dust is where it comes from. And there's research studies that support this, that even say you should be including dust in assessments of homes and not using air sample. Like it even gets super clear on like how you should be using them. So we're analyzing the dust. The EPA went out, they created this study, which is known as ERMI now. Like I said, two pieces came out of it, the PCR for mold, which is all of these different mold species that you're seeing here, right? So this is what's coming out of it. And then the second piece that came out of it is this little yellow box over here. That is your ERMI score, okay? You can see it says ERMI results is this box. None of this is your ERMI results. This is your ERMI result, right? So I want to be very clear about that. So what are they doing here? What they're doing is they're looking at these two numbers. So they're creating a sum of the logarithm math. I won't get into all of you on it, but basically they're grouping these molds into two groups. Now, the first thing that's wrong with this is when you look at the top where it says group 1, group 2. Group 1, water damage molds. Group 2, common indoor molds. Raise of hands. How many people think that mold does not need water to grow? We got a couple people, but mold does need water to grow. So in theory, every single one of these is a water damage mold. There's no such thing as a non-water damage mold. And what they did in the panels is they devalued group 2 initially. They normalized it by the way they labeled it. Just because they saw it more often doesn't mean that it's not as big of a deal, right? I'm sure we could all think of things that are happening in the world right now that happen often that are not good, right? And we won't get into it, but like think of it like this, right? So just because you see it a lot doesn't mean that it's like okay, but the way they've labeled it and even created the report is normalizing all these. There are molds over here, first off, that need medium to high amounts of water to even grow, which inherently means that they would technically fall over here. And two, there are molds on this side that create mycotoxins. So like they're just as problematic as the other ones. So this is the first thing, okay? Now the second thing then is how they get their ERMI score. What they're doing is they're subtracting 20. Can you see my mouse moving around or no? Do I need to like?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're subtracting 21 from 19 to get this score. What are they saying when they do that? What are they implying in their math? Not only are they devaluing it by how they label it, They're not even just saying, don't worry about this. They're actually saying, not only don't worry about it, but it's almost good. It's good that these are here because we're going to subtract them from the bad ones. And then we're going to give you a total. It makes no sense. It's like if I went to my daughter and I sat her on the counter and I said, all right, over here, I got 2 apples. And over here, here's 2 more apples. Honey, how many apples are on the table? And she would say 4 because she's a little genius and she can count. And then if I went to her and I said the same thing, here's 2 apples and here's 2 more apples, and I put them in front of her, they're literally sitting in front of her. This map would be the equivalent of her looking at me and saying, I don't see any apples. There's none. There's no apples here. There's 4 apples, okay, for the record. Okay, so this is the problem with ERMI. There's good. The good is that we're getting to the dust. It's giving us a historical view of what's happening in the house. So you get rid of that 5-minute air sample collection thing. You can get a really good understanding of what's happened there. You're getting down to the species level, and you're getting a load of not only the spores, but the little fragments that break off of the colonies, which are actually in a higher, way higher magnitude than spores. So just to give context on that, there are multiple studies that say that you could have the fragments that break off of a colony, so not the spore, but like the little pieces of it that fall off, can be up to 500 times the number of spores that come off that colony.
Wow.
I have 10 stores of Stachybotrys. I have 5,000 fragments of Stachybotrys that may all be covered in the trichothecene toxin that it produced also. But if I'm only looking at spores, I'm not seeing the whole thing. So the true exposure load that someone is breathing needs to be viewed in this sense. It needs to be viewed in overall load of fragment plus spore altogether. If you're taking it out, you're literally missing 100 times magnitudes of actual exposure. So that's the good of what you get. The bad is the score. So then if we know that that's the problem, we know the scoring issue is a problem, then what's the solution? How do we not use ERMI? How do we do this? And, to get into it, it's really asking these questions. The only reason that somebody runs an ERMI is because they want to answer these 3 questions. I know this because I've taken literally thousands of phone calls from people who ran ERMIs and then asked me to tell them what it meant. And at the core, they're asking me these 3 things. Do I have a mold problem in a house? How bad is it? And what do I do? That's why you're running this test, because it's a screening test. People are running this test because they just want to understand, is there an issue here? Is my doctor right? I need validation to tell me that I need to go further down the rabbit hole here, or maybe I don't, right? Like, that's why this sample exists. And this is every reason that somebody asks me to interpret one. This is the core of what they want to know, right? So I was like, okay, if I know what people want to know out of this sample, and there's good stuff in it in terms of how it's analyzing dust and all this stuff, then how do I answer these questions for somebody? If I was going to make a test, what would I do? It wouldn't be a singular score. It also wouldn't be a singular score that said 4 apples equals none, but let's take the math out of it. It wouldn't just be a number with no context, right? The core of every single one of these questions is not actually like individual. Every one of these questions is based on how they compare to someone else. Do I have a mold problem? It's relative. I don't know. How bad is this problem? Right? It kind of ties in. Those first 2 go together. Like, yeah, maybe I have a mold issue, but if 90% of houses are worse than mine, then do I really have a mold problem in the grand scheme of things? Maybe not, right? So this comparison piece has to occur for us to be able to put context to our home in the grand scheme of what's going on, right? And so that was sort of what I challenged myself with, and how do we frame this and what do we do? And so we created what's called the dust test. The dust test, just so you guys know, is the same ERMI panel. Okay, it's literally the same 36 molds. We took off the ERMI overlay of interpretation and we put on a different overlay. Now, what is our overlay? The thing about how we go through houses is I'm not just doing a dust test. See, when the EPA ran this sample, they just collected dust and looked at it and they tried to guess what was happening, because they had no idea what was happening in the houses because they didn't inspect them. They literally just took dust and tried to look at data and figure something out. We have been in thousands and thousands of houses and ran ERMIs in all of them. But I can also tell you exactly how many sources of mold were in that house because we tested them. I could tell you if there were mycotoxins there or not. I could tell you if there were endotoxins there or not. We have the complete picture of what a house looked like, and we can anchor it to an ERMI sample. So then what we did is we went out and figured out a machine learning algorithm that can look at all of this and actually give us something that makes sense. Something where we can rank our house. The big thing I always wanted to be able to do is rank my house against all the other houses. That's what I wanted to be able to do. but anchored in inspections where the data is coming from a true understanding of everything that's happened in that house in terms of what we found in the house, right? And that's what the dust test, that's the overlay that we put on the dust test, right? So if you look at what it is, same 36 molds, except you can see that I didn't label them as one not important and the other one important. They're just two different groups of molds. They're all mold. Mold is mold, right? The other thing, so we kind of color coded it. This thing lights up like a Christmas tree, then you know that you have a lot of things that are higher in magnitude than kind of what the core study looked like. Just easier to read. A lot of this needs to be ease of use, ease of reading, ease of understanding. That was like a big piece of trying to figure this out. We also put on the ability in the dust test, if you want to, which is what's in the giveaway that was mentioned earlier, where you can test for mycotoxins and endotoxins on the same dust sample. And if you go out and do these individually, you're paying hundreds for this, for that, for that. It actually ends up being more in total than if you lump them all together running through the dust test. So if you're like trying to like look at everything for patients, it's actually a cheaper nut for them to do it this way, but then they get it all wrapped into a singular report, which is helpful. But then the next piece, so this is great. This still doesn't really answer any of those questions, right? It's still numbers on a page and stuff highlighting. So then this is really the summary, and this is what we're trying to talk through. How your home compares to others. This is it. So somebody runs this, and they don't know what any of that stuff meant on the previous page. They could come here and they could say, I'm sitting here, I'm in this group of the percentile. Why is the code 4 percentile such a large spread? And I put it here on purpose because of what I said at the top. Most homes have water damage. So the difference between the homes were so close that you couldn't percentile break it out any different in groups because they were so close to each other. This is just illustrating how widespread of a water damage issue exists in homes everywhere, right? And that was really interesting when we pulled this out. But the idea here is like, if I'm in group 4 here, here's my percentile. My whole vision for this is I just had a baby and we're taking him in for his like 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, and they would like measure his circumference of his head and then tell me what percentile his head size was, basically. Like you have a giant headed child or a teeny headed child or whatever. And so I was like, this makes sense to me. I know how my kid's head ranks on the scale of other heads. So that was how I wanted to try to like make this work. And so the nice thing about this, you can look at this real quickly. If you're in code 5, you know you're in the 9% worst of all homes that were in the 3 years of homes that we included in the study. Bam, now I have context. I know I have a problem and I know it's bad. Cool. What do I do next, right? You get into the next question. If you fall into code like, let's say 3, you're like, hey, I'm in the lower 25 to 50% of homes. This isn't a just like mail my stuff in and go find a new home. I'm at worst a coin flip to finding a new home. And at best, I'm better than 74% of other homes that are out there. This place is worth at least examining and figuring out what it looks like and diving in further. And that was sort of the vision behind all of this. The biggest piece though is then the what do I do? And you can't answer that in a single sheet of paper. So if people are doing ERMIs, they're going to do 2 things. One, they're going to call the lab first. They're going to say, lab, what does this mean? And you know what the lab is going to say? Not my job. Go find somebody to tell you what this means. Then they're going to go out and they're going to do 1 of 2 things. They're going to pay some Instagram influencer a couple $100 to try to interpret their ERMI, even though they've never seen their house. Or they're going to go to you and they're going to ask you what the ERMI means. And it's completely unfair to ask you what it means because why should you know what all this stuff means? You have enough to do with the body, right? So the biggest thing that we wrapped into how this works is that there is a phone call that comes with us, like at the back end, right? You're getting a consult with us, with our team. We have all the data. We created the overlay for the interpretation. We know what it means, and we've inspected thousands of houses. So like now as we get in the conversations, like, well, what's your goal? Do you own? Do you rent? What do you want to happen? What do you not want to happen? And we start helping them understand what their next step should be, right? And talk through that process.
Counsel people on insurance as well, you know, when it might be an insurance claim? Do you also do that?
Yeah, we talk through them about like the core concepts on how to try to maximize your insurance. I even have a whole training on how to maximize insurance that we call mold insurance hacks.
So there's so many questions. We have 40 questions that our people are looking for answers on, and we're very short on time right now. And so I just want to let you know that so that you can like bring home the most important points, and we can talk key takeaways. But I think I'd like to have you maybe wrap up what a proper remediation looks like and how to know if it worked in a nutshell, if you can.
In a nutshell. Cool. What a proper remediation looks like, I think we touched on earlier. It's source, it's cleaning of the house, it's making sure that everything's cleaned in that way, right? I think that kind of nuts that handles that. How do you know if it worked? You have to post-test afterwards. And what most companies do is they'll come and they'll put an air sample in the middle of your containment and say there's no mold in your air. Were they contracted to remediate the air? The answer is no. They were told to remediate the mold that was growing in this wall. If we're not post-testing the exposed framing and the areas back here that were actually physically cleaned, then we're not truly understanding if the remediation worked, right? And I think that's kind of the big piece of it. Yes, you do have to do an air testing and containment because when you rip up a wall, stuff gets everywhere. So you have to clean all that out. But the root issue is that we have to make sure that this is all handled. And so that's like kind of how you know it works. The source level testing is to try to feel if that's out of place or if that's been taken away.
Okay.
I should say.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. I feel like we have hours of conversation remaining. And I'll let these key takeaways play. And Maria, did you want to? I see you.
Oh, I know. I'm watching the Q&A. It's amazing. We have so many questions. I'm just so grateful to both of you for providing this information. It's a needed topic.
And I think if I could pop in with one thought is that I see a lot of questions on how to manage it from a health perspective, and that's really a different conversation.
Yeah.
And it's one that we're happy to have. And we do have some people coming on in the coming year on our webinar that are mold experts. And for the practitioners here, we can do full trainings on how to help manage a patient that that has mold toxicity issues from our perspective as a company. But for consumers, keep an eye out for coming information. And maybe, Brian, do you have any resources at all that you can recommend for people with health concerns? I'm sorry, I usurped the conversation, Maria.
I mean, I'm not the health expert, right? I defer to all of you all the time. Okay. I'm never going to come in and say I know how to do something that I don't know how to do. I just think you have to go to the right place to get the information. I think that's the most important thing.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, real quick. I just want to ask everyone who's still on with us, which is almost everyone who started with us. I'm just always thinking this happens a lot for us when we have complex topics like that. Mm-hmm. Would you be interested in, let's just maybe call it a multi-series webinar education platform next year on this topic? Just if you just want to pop yes in the chat, I just want to see how
great question
would be. Yeah. And I think too, I just want to offer this up and just remind everyone, we have robust clinical team offerings on training. So if you're a practitioner, we are going to send out the mold and I think it's a mold and mycotoxin protocol. But if you want, you guys, we have this incredible clinical team at your fingertips. Let's get you scheduled for a consult. Our team is very experienced in this topic. So of course, you're going to remediate your environment and Brian, I mean, amazing testing resources. I have been through this in my family as well. So I know the information out there, it's hard to discern. And then you're left with, how's my body dealing with it? Maybe it's fine, but maybe it's not. So how do we determine that? Yeah.
So what do you think, Maria? Do I have time to do 1 minute on our case study?
Yeah, let's pop that up, because I do want to say, I do want to show that we have some expertise around mold in the body and what happens and how we can deal with that. So let's look at that real quick.
So what you're looking at here is the company that's now Mosaic Diagnostics is now, it used to be Great Plains Laboratory. And this maybe is 5 years old now, this study, and it was on a 4-year-old pediatric, of course, patient. The patient had chronic sinus issues, sinus congestion, and the doctor had prescribed, her doctor had prescribed 3 rounds of antibiotics through the course of a year. Of course, it was the wrong target, and so it had no effect on helping resolve her symptoms. But eventually what they found was that there was mold in her daycare environment. So they pulled her out of that. So they did what Brian's company would do, right? Which is to remove the underlying cause, but it left her with this mycotoxin exposure. And this patient used biocidin liquid, both in the oral route, but also administered to the sinuses as well. and also the GI detox, which is a binder, so it will bind mycotoxins among many other things, heavy metals and debris from microbial die-off as well. And you can see, and I can't remember the time frame on this, I think it was 3 months. You can see the before and after testing. The other thing to be aware of, really important, and I can vouch for this personally, is that when you work with something like biocidin that disrupts biofilms, you will also mobilize the remaining mycotoxins that are stuck in the biofilms. And it's really important to have an understanding of how to support the patient. I was the patient, and like I always do, I went straight to max, maybe more than max dosing when I started the biocidin liquid, and I had a full body mold toxicity symptom recurrence when I did that, even though I was out of the environment, right? And so whatever mycotoxins were being housed in biofilms and interstitial tissue or in my body were mobilized at that time. And so I've had this experience personally watching mycotoxins mobilized with the use of biocidin. And so without making any broad claims, this is just a single case study and an anecdotal what happened to Jocelyn in my own personal experience. But we have research underway on MARCONS, which is a common coinciding condition with mold, and lots of clinical resources, like Maria said, as well, to support practitioners on how to use this product line with efficacy in these patients. So I will leave it at that because we're over time.
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Strand, what was that protocol? Was it our microbiome detox program, or was it just biocidin and GI detox?
You know what? I'm not sure. I think it was the BioClear cleansing program, but I would love, we have the clinical team here. So if one of the clinical team could pop it into the chat, what the protocol for that particular patient was, that would be great, because I don't remember. It was either the biocidin liquid and GI detox plus a nasal application of that. Yeah. Or it may have also included our ProFlora, which is our probiotic.
So. Yeah. Okay, great. 54 questions. I'll tell you what, Dr. Strand, if you wouldn't mind looking at the questions, I'm going to just go through. I'm going to make sure our giveaways, because we have some really cool giveaways today. I'm going to run through that. Would you mind looking at the questions while I do that and pull out?
Sure thing.
A few? That would be great. Let's get to some questions.
So I want to just say there are so many questions, and lots of times I can sort of group them and answer lots of them at once, but this is really unique in that almost every question is different from the other questions. And so I want to try to get Brian first, I want to apologize to people we don't get to answer live. We're going to do the best that we can. And then we didn't even ask Brian, how late can you go, Brian? before we started talking. So
yeah. No, I'm good. I want to do for you guys and make sure everybody's getting what they want out of it. I know I rambled a little bit, so let's spend some time and answer questions.
Okay. This is great. Thank you. So the first one is air purifiers. Are they useful? When are they useful? Do you have brands that you recommend?
Yes. Are they useful? Yes. They have to be the right kind. None of your Best Buy, Costco air purifiers. We talk about those teeny particles that break off, that fragment off of colonies. We need purifiers that can pull that out of the breathable air that's going on. So you're looking to get stuff that goes down to like less than 0.01 micron. Like you want to get that small. So like 0.007, 0.003. The main ones that I like, I actually have 6 in my house right now. I have IntelliPures in my main living spaces, in my bedrooms. So I have those. IQ Airs are also really good. They filter down super low as well. And even Air Doctors are good. And some of those sometimes seem a little more affordable for people. So all 3 of those are good options.
Awesome. That's a great, helpful response. So how about when we see surface mold, in whether it's on a window frame, or whether it's on a bathroom ceiling or on a bathroom shower curtain, what's the best way to address surface mold to clean it up?
It's funny because all 3 of those are very different. So windows may just be a surface issue that's truly on the surface. If it's in the glass of the window or sort of the window casing, windows will form condensation from temperature differences. So they become a water source. Dust settles down there, mold spores could settle. You could truly just have a surface level mold issue on glass, on metal, something like that. They can be cleaned, right? Part of it is an inspection has to happen to really figure out why it's happening, but let's just say that's what's happening in that case. So that's more of a simple clean. The shower curtain, throw it away. There's no cleaning the shower curtain, right? First off, guys, they're cheap, right? We got to start thinking about like, what are we trying to risk here in this? And a shower curtain at Target's $15, like go get your shower curtain. But they can't be cleaned because they're more of a porous material. You can't get it out. The third thing, ceilings. Now, ceilings are different. You're not surface cleaning ceilings, drywall, anything like that, because mold has roots and mold grows in. So if you cut off the tip, it doesn't mean that the other stuff isn't still hidden up here. And we talked about how that moves through. So in that case, it is really important to have an inspection, source test the area specifically, see if there's something going on up there. So 3 very different situations.
Okay, great. Are there building materials that you are most, and you already talked about it a little bit, but where you're most concerned, like where would you lean towards building materials? Where would you be most concerned about mold damage?
You know, honestly, guys, we don't have control over how our houses are built, frankly, right? And so our houses are all built out of wood and drywall, which is all mold food. So it's less about which materials I'm more concerned about, and it's more about what areas in a home have a more highly likelihood of some sort of moisture problem happening. And then I'm concerned about the materials around that. So I'd almost reframe it like showers, toilets, windows, under sinks, by your dishwasher, like any sort of water focused appliance or anything like that. Like try to focus your eyes there as opposed to like specific building materials.
Okay, that's great. Okay, do you have an educational site for consumers on all of this, how to help identify mold and mold issues? And do you have somewhere that you send them for the health concerns that arise?
So on the first piece, we actually have an entire training program we created specifically for consumers called Toxic Mold 101. The link that you guys are going to mail out, that you mentioned that you're going to email out. So the call that comes on that, which was that introductory call, that is to basically get you set up into what we call our practitioner's mold toolkit. In the toolkit, we've created training programs for consumer that you can literally give to your patients for free. It's like free access to all that stuff. We've created training programs for you, the practitioner, specifically if you're under certain designations, you can get CE credits that would attach to that, like they'll qualify. We've been qualified for certain, so it's in there. So there's resources for you. There's resources for patients. It's all in there. So if you're looking for that stuff, make sure you set that call and just do that quick thing, and we'll get you rolled into that, and then you can have access to all that and literally give it out to anybody that you want to.
Okay, great. Okay. Ozone machines, when and how to use them.
I'm not a big fan of ozone in the house. Ozone works. It's not that it doesn't work, right? It actually was part of some of our cleaning protocols earlier in the earlier days. The problem with ozone is it's not focused. It's not specific. Ozone is going to break down anything that it comes in contact with. And so if we're thinking about our home and we have seals around our windows and we just have stuff going on, like I don't want ozone going over to those things and starting to deteriorate that stuff. And it will, because we're not targeting it anywhere. Plus, if you do it in your house and you're really not managing it properly, it's very bad for us to breathe, right? So like there's like that portion of it too. In our kind of full house cleaning plans years ago, like I said, we used to include it as part of like the fog piece that happened before a wipe down. But then we're like, hey, what if we took ozone out and literally just put anything else in? Did it change anything in how effective the cleaning was? And the answer was no. So like, cool, let's take out this thing that we know can maybe be a little more aggressive and deteriorate other things, swap it in with something else and do that. So ozone works in certain cases. I'm never gonna say like, don't use it. Like technically it works, like the chemical portion of it, it works, biologically it works, but I just feel like that there's too much risk and some other things that can happen with it.
Really, that's really, really helpful information. So we know that your test can be used anywhere. We can get it shipped to us. But if someone, like for me, if I'm in Minnesota and I need remediation support, is that something that you do across the country as well?
Yeah, so just to be clear, so we're inspection, and we identify where the problems are, the severity of them. We help you prioritize like what you should be attacking in remediation in a tiered fashion and make it less overwhelming. And we write all of the step-by-step protocol on how to do the remediation, right? So that's like our role in what we do. But we don't come in and do like the surgery on the house, right? In a lot of states, it's actually illegal to do that. because there's a conflict there in theory. If I'm saying there's 1,000 problems and I'm going to fix it for $10 million, like, you're welcome, right? So there's a conflict there. But in terms of how we work and what we do, we service the entire country. One question we get a lot about that is, do we like subcontract out workers in different places? The answer is no. Everyone works directly for me, is trained directly by me through my processes and certifications internally. And then we hire people strategically in different places of the country so we can travel and get to places where we need to. So we do that in person. And then lastly, we're just rolling out in the next couple of weeks an app, a mobile app companion that ties in with our team. So for example, like as it works now, you'd have to fly us out, right? A patient would have to fly us out. We'd have to go through the whole house. It could be expensive, right? It's a barrier. But like I've always believed, and it's always been our mission moving forward, that you shouldn't have to be lucky enough to live where we live or be independently wealthy to be able to be healthy. It doesn't make any sense, right? So our goal first was to figure out how can we be everywhere. We figured that piece out. The next thing is like, okay, how can we reduce other barriers, price being one of them, and flexibility, and like how much of a house we're looking at. So basically what the app allows us to do is get a window into your space. And in the app, let's say, for example, you're like, I have a bathroom, I'm concerned about a bathroom or something. We're like, do you have a window in this bathroom? You say, yes, cool. I need these 5 pictures of this window. If I get these 5 pictures, because I know everything that we train our team to look on throughout a house, that then gets reviewed by my team of consultants. So you're still getting the same human review on every single thing that's going on. The app just becomes a window that a homeowner or a renter can use in their space to give us visibility into what's going on. You can inspect one room if you want to. So you don't have to do a whole house. So it's completely flexible on pricing, on how much you want looked at, but you don't skimp on the quality of the inspection, and all of the consulting and everything that comes afterwards with protocols and all that is all still in line. It's all still available there. So I'm really, really excited about that rollout. So we literally can be anywhere, anytime, any price point, any goal, any flexibility, any of that stuff.
Excellent. Excellent. So there are more questions, but I'm feeling like we need to wrap up. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add at all, Maria?
No, I am just, I always get really a little, choked up because I'm just so grateful to you, Brian, for coming on, and Dr. Strand and our team for just answering as many questions as we can, for sharing this knowledge. I don't know that it's out there mainstream. Even the air filters that we have here, and we've had these same air filters shared on with other practitioners. It's not they're not inexpensive, I will say that, but definitely worth it. So I'm just grateful for you both for coming on and educating both our audiences today. So I don't have anything. If you all don't have any finishing remarks, then I think we can wrap up for everyone and give them a couple final notes here.
Yeah, just thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity. Would love to help you guys in any way we can, and you guys have set that call, and we literally will help you any way that we can help you. So we're all about supporting you guys because we know you support the people that need it, and you guys deserve to have that support too. So super thankful, grateful to be here.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks so much for coming on.
We just love being able to bring this level of education. So thank you both. And remember, look for the replay email for everyone in your inbox by Friday. And as a reminder for those with practitioner accounts, the full content of today's presentation will be posted inside BioScience Academy. We also hope you'll keep up with us on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook, YouTube. There's some great videos there, and LinkedIn as well. And we'll see you back here in December. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.